Welcome to another episode of the Feisty Heroine podcast show. Today, I will be interviewing Pip Brown. Pip Brown lives on the Isle of Wight along the south coast of the UK with her 2 rescue dogs and has been single for the past 5 years. She is the host of One Single Woman, which is a podcast she started in January this year when she had an awakening that having spent her life feeling the pressure to be coupled, life is, in fact, completely wonderful as a single and child-free woman. Pip is passionate about exposing the impact of social pressures, not just on the human race, but on the world and our future. Let's get started. Hi, Pip.
Hi, Rachel. Hello.
I'm so excited to have Pip Brown on this episode of the Feisty Heroine. She runs the podcast One Single Woman over across the pond. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Rachel, for having me. And congratulations on starting your new podcast. I cannot wait to hear it.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to start this episode of I am so grateful and thankful that I came across your podcast. I think it was a big aha moment of like, oh, wow, I can do this myself. So if you can talk a little bit about like when you started your podcast, how you came about making this big decision. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. That's such a lovely thing to say. Yeah, well, it's a bit of a chain reaction here going on because I'd listened to somebody else's podcast and it was exactly the same. I had a aha moment about everything. I was listening to Lucy Megason, who runs Spinsterhood Reimagined, and I came across her one day and I was listening to this lady talking about my lifestyle in this really positive manner, which I had never heard before. I'd never heard anybody describe being single and child-free as this amazing, peaceful, awesome experience as a woman. And so I had exactly the same thing. I was like, oh my gosh, wow, okay, this is what I would potentially like to do. Actually, it wasn't immediately. I didn't immediately start a podcast. I kind of got in touch with Lucy and became actually really good friends with her. But I started my Instagram account to start with and was talking about sort of, being single and the fact that I didn't have children. And then Lucy invited me on and she interviewed me on her podcast. And then I sort of decided that I was going to start as well because I wanted to add to this space as you are. And I think that the bigger this space gets, the more momentum this builds and the more people feel accepted in their life choices if it is your path in life to live more of a solo life.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting to hear your perspective because it's like I'm here in the US and you're in the UK. I do think it's becoming more common for women, especially to live a solo life. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about what the landscape looks like in England or, just among the people you interact with.
Yeah, I think I've definitely seen a shift even since I've started online with the amount of people adding to this. Although I must say it does, like from everything that I've seen, it's very, very USA heavy, I would say, from my...
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, that's certainly from my experience. Although, obviously, like I say, the lady that I came across, she's in the UK, and there are others over here. There's also Ariana Dunn. She was running a solo podcast. She's over in Ireland. You've got obviously Peter over in the USA. But yeah, I think with regards to the landscape, I think it's a sort of, obviously there's areas in the world where this is far less likely to probably ever become a thing. But we are quite privileged. I'm so grateful to live in a country where you do actually have this choice to have this way of life. I think that's a really important thing to point out, that there are a lot of people in the world who would never probably be able to live this way of life.
Right. No, I think that's a very good point. It's interesting that you said it, like the US, because I think that sometimes, like, I was living in New York City, but now I'm back in my hometown and it's very conservative here. So it's like, I do think that it is changing as far as the landscape. But can you talk a little bit about, like, do you feel like there's still like pressure, even though like you've kind of moved on and like accepted, like, oh, I love this lifestyle? Do you feel like there's pressure from family and friends and, just society to partner up?
Yeah, definitely. There is definitely. I mean, I'm very, very lucky with my family and friends. Definitely I don't now receive any pressure in that form. But definitely within society, it's this constant message of I think it's a lack of acceptance, and it's a lack of people not being able to accept that somebody is happy on their own, living a life without a partner. And it's almost like, yeah, but you will meet somebody, and there is somebody out there for you. And, you know, I lived my life on that narrative. I believed that, and I was sort of looking for somebody. And then, I mean, my last relationship ended at the end of 2019. And then obviously we went into COVID, and that period of time where we were sort of in isolation and I was on my own because I live on my own, that really, really sort of was quite an enlightening time for me, because I was able to drop all of the dating stuff. Well, obviously I had to drop the dating stuff. You couldn't go out dating. And I think it really sort of cemented in me just how I was enjoying that peace and that quiet, and the peace and quiet, not just in a literal sense. It was the peace and quiet of not thinking about it, because it was sort of, like I say, it was sort of I mean, you could go on dating apps and things, but you weren't going out dating. But, you only have to go onto social media to see, the pressure is everywhere, isn't it? It's absolutely everywhere. And so, I mean, I think in that way, it's still there, but I think it's how you let that affect your life. That's the key to it. And I think that when you wake up to the fact that that is exactly what it is, it's pressure, that's when you can kind of turn your life around and make decisions that are right for you, not right for a box that you're meant to be fitting into.
Right. That is such a great point because it's like you mentioned, it's on social media. It's kind of everywhere, right? Like you're scrolling through the feed, and then especially like this time of year, it was like weddings and then babies. It's like what we choose to celebrate as society. You know.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I mean, I've read so many posts from people sort of saying that they have had, like big job promotions and single people. They've had like job promotions, moved into a new house, and they don't get any form of that sort of validation online as they would have done if they'd said that they were in a relationship or they were engaged or they were going to have a baby. It's just not met with that same level of it's like a sort of looked at as this superior way of life, isn't it? Which, and I think that for so many people, I think that the problem is, especially with social media, it's so easy to go on there and to look at all these pictures and posts that people are putting up and be drawn into thinking that everything is wonderful. And yes, it may be for some people, but I think that there's a lot that you don't see in pictures that are put on social media. And I think it's really important to bear that in mind, especially if you are feeling, a bit sort of down about your single status and you're in that mindset of sort of thinking that you want to be with somebody. Then social media is not not the ideal place to be, like not for your personal feed and stuff like that. It's better to, go and follow people who are, like us, like promoting another way of life that is absolutely, it's just a different way of life. It's no better, it's no worse, it's just different, and they should both be celebrated in exactly the same way.
Right. I've even seen posts about like women writing books, and then that not getting the same attention. I don't know if you are familiar with Tori Dunlap, but she wrote a book called The Financial Feminist, and her Instagram account is her first 100K, and she's written a book. She's done all these amazing things. And then she recently posted something on Instagram about like dating someone, and just like people came out of the woodwork to congratulate her on this. And she made a post about it. She's like, this is so interesting that like, I do all this amazing work and this is what people are choosing to focus on.
Just celebrating. Oh no. But that just shows how deeply ingrained it all is. That's
Yeah.
the thing, that we look at that as that's the achievement, not, writing an incredible book. That's mad, isn't it?
Yeah. So kind of like segueing into that, like, one of the things I'm hoping to do with this podcast is to kind of, change the narrative and like talk about, of course, there's good things and bad things about every lifestyle, right? I think I'm trying to focus on, all these positive things because I think there is like a fear of being single. I think, society is kind of ingrained in our heads that like, oh, it's scary to be single or, something to be afraid of. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about, kind of you discovering this podcast and then like the wonderful things that you've discovered, like once you've turned this corner of accepting your single lifestyle and the beauty of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, sort of going sort of into my sort of dating history was I was always of the mindset that I needed to be in a relationship because of the exact things that we've just been talking about. It's everywhere. I spent my life believing that my life would begin once I got into a relationship. That was kind of how I saw life. But what was funny about it was I would get into relationships, but I was never, ever truly happy. I would go along with it because I was thinking, well, not every these are the other things that we're told is, oh, not every relationship's perfect. Relationships take work.
Compromise. You have to compromise.
You have to compromise. You have to do this, that, and the other. And so I was sort of like pushing myself into these situations, if you like. But there was always this inner voice that was like, this isn't right for you. This isn't right for you. And I'm so grateful that I always followed that inner voice and I always ended up leaving the relationship. And each time that I did, I was so relieved. I was like, oh, I'm single again. I can chill for a bit. I can just sort of get over. I mean, obviously, like there's always sadness when you finish a relationship, but I found that being single again was where I was happy. But the thing was that I wouldn't let myself have that. Does that make sense? I was too busy thinking, well, yeah, but it's just not the right one, and sort of pushing myself back onto the dating apps and on all of this. And it was like I say, that day, I remember I'd taken my dogs for a walk. I've sort of explained all this on my podcast, but I'd taken my dogs for a walk. I just happened to stumble across Spinsterhood Reimagined, listen to what Lucy was saying, and that was like a light bulb just went on. And I thought to myself, the me that is happy inside when I get that feeling when I come out of a relationship, that's the real me. And that's where I'm happy. And there are things about being in a relationship that do benefit you, especially, we live in a world built for two. Financially, etc., you are always going to benefit from being in a relationship because of how the world is designed around all of this. But I think it's so important to realize that there's nothing like the inner peace and the happiness that you get from not being in the wrong relationship. That's the point. It's not a case of making this decision and saying once and for all, like, that's it, I'm never going to be in a relationship again. But it's knowing that you won't let yourself be in the wrong relationship and then sort of going from there and building your life around making yourself happy and, spending your time with friends and doing things that you love doing. And, personal growth, that's just been a huge part of the journey. And it's not always easy as a single person, but when you balance that up against being in the wrong relationship, that's the deal breaker, basically, isn't it? That we all know what that's like to be with somebody and it's not right. And that's huge compromise. Whereas being on your own, you're not making those compromises.
I think it's one of those things where, yeah, I can totally relate to everything that you just said because I think that's kind of how I turned the corner of, our stories are very similar in that way of just kind of realizing that it's better to be single than be in a bad relationship. And I think the current landscape kind of supports staying in a bad relationship, especially for women, instead of, being single because of like finances and things like that. I think that's a very important point. Like even going on vacation, it's like you're paying for two people in the hotel room, even though there's only one person. It's like small things.
I know. This is what that is. Yeah, it is a huge thing, isn't it? Yeah, like you said, like going on holidays and things like that is really expensive thing to do on your own, unfortunately, which is crazy. It's crazy. And over here, I don't know if you guys have got it, but we've got a single occupancy council tax on our homes. And so you can get a discount of like 25%. And there's some girls over here, there are some girls over here campaigning to make it a 50% discount, which is exactly what it should be. But yeah, there's the odd little sort of benefit. But apart from that, yeah, financially, you're much better off in a couple. Of course you are. But like you said, the narrative around it is to stay in that situation rather than go it alone and be on your own, which is so, so sad, because all that does is end up with a lot of miserable people in a lot of miserable situations.
Similar to you, my last relationship was during the pandemic. Like, had an ex that looked me up, and I stayed in that relationship for a year, and then I just realized, I was like, no, like that was like the start of my realization of knowing that, like, I'm gonna be okay on my own. Because I think as women sometimes we're taught we needed, even from the like fairy tale books whenever we're young, like we need someone to save us, kind of thing.
Exactly. We absolutely don't. We absolutely don't.
I know. We don't, So, and some of the men I was meeting in New York, because, I grew up on a farm. And so, like, my dad taught me how to, like, change my oil, like, do things. And I was like, some of the men I was meeting in New York, I'm like, wow, you don't know how to do anything. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what you're bringing to the table here, So,
You're like changing their flat tire for them or something.
yeah, I'm like, I don't know, like, especially the last guy I dated, I was just like, I don't know what you're bringing to the table here, dude. Like, I don't know.
So it sound similar, like you had that same sort of just awakening to the fact that you could just do it on your own and just sort of just not have to be in that situation just for the sake of it.
Well, yeah, and I think, like, because I'm a big traveler, and I was just kind of like constantly waiting. Like, my breakup moment was whenever, like, I had asked him to go, like, the world was opening up again, and I had asked him to go on a trip to Croatia with me, and he couldn't make up his mind because he didn't want to commit to me. He didn't want to commit to anything. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to live my life like this. Like, I'm going to go on a great trip with my friends. We were going to be sailing for a week, and he couldn't commit to that. And I was like, no, this is not going to be my life. So I think it's like coming to terms with that, like, it's great to share your life with someone, but I also know a lot of people that end up not traveling with their partner. We think that, like, the partner is going to solve all these things.
Exactly. It's like it's presented, isn't it, as this magical mystery person who
Yeah.
is going to be there whenever something bad happens. They're going to be there for this, be there for that, and the way that it is presented and the actual reality of that are two very different things. And I think that some people do genuinely find that amazing connection with somebody, and I'm sure we all know those people, absolutely, but I don't think it's realistic to say that absolutely everyone is going to find that person, and also not that everybody wants to live that same lifestyle.
Yeah, and I think, looping back to what you said earlier, like, I'm very open to a relationship, because I think, like, sometimes, like, there's also these judgments about, as women are being more comfortable with being single, like, men have been allowed to be bachelors for forever, right? So, like, the thing that, like, single women were called spinsters and all these things, like, I'm very open to a relationship. I'm just no longer open to the wrong relationship, or just being in a relationship for the sake of being in one.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, that's what we were talking about before we started, wasn't it? I think that happiness is when you get to that point where you're so happy as a single entity. So you're so happy as you are, that person needs to add value to your life, because you get yourself to a point, that's certainly where I am, and it sounds exactly what you are, where you wouldn't even tolerate somebody coming in to mess that up because it's too important to you. You get to that point where you're happy within your own skin, and you don't need that validation of a relationship to complete you as a person. You're complete as you are.
Yeah. I don't know if you found this too, but, like, after I kind of had the realization that was 2021, and then I still in like the searching phase for like a couple years, but I stopped dating completely a year ago. I've been off the apps for about 3 years, but like, there was still this thing of like going on vacation or, going to a restaurant and maybe meeting someone, but like this past year, I've just stopped even searching. And I think there's like a peace you find, right? And like you were talking about, once you find this, like it's hard to like invite somebody else in and like mess it up, you know?
It is, Rachel, and that is the word. That's the word that I think, I mean, that's something that I've certainly mentioned on my own podcast, is this inner peace that you have when you're no longer looking for that, and you're no longer bothered about it. You're not, it just doesn't enter my head to look for somebody to go out on a date with. It doesn't, my relationship status, apart from hosting a podcast about it, doesn't literally doesn't enter my head. I don't think about it anymore. And like we said, like neither of us are closed off to that. But at the same time, that part of me is gone now. The part that was searching for that person, there's just no way. There's just no way. Absolutely, absolutely not.
Yeah. And I think, just changing the mindset, right? So it's kind of like a personal growth you mentioned, but it's like a mindset shift to being like single and open versus single and searching. I think that is like the mindset shift. If a lot of women, and hopefully women listening to this, can make that shift, because I think, I don't know if you can speak to this, but like there's like that sense of lack, right? Like, or, oh, you're missing something in your life, or you must be sad and lonely because you don't have someone. And I think that sometimes that does keep, women in bad relationships. So I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely right. And that was definitely how I felt throughout my life, was that I was lacking something, and that I wasn't, it's almost like another feeling that I used to have. And I think that this is quite an important point to make, is that I think there's almost an element of, you haven't grown up. Does that make sense? If you're not in that relationship and you haven't got children, it's as if, Pip hasn't done all of that. And it's like, well, actually, I'm busy doing other things, like, obviously, like we've got our podcasts and things, and doing things to help other people. And I think there is that sort of, that a sense of that you're just sort of just splashing about in life, and that's not true at all. That isn't true. And I think it can actually be a real indication that somebody has done a lot of personal growth and actually like put a lot of thought into it to get to a point where you are so secure in yourself as a person, to not just let somebody in just for the sake of it. And I think that's a really important place to be able to get to.
I think it's kind of also along the lines of like you're lacking something, or like something's wrong with you. I think sometimes we're like, I remember like hearing comments when I was a little girl, like, oh, they're single and 40 in their 40s. They couldn't, it's like almost like they couldn't find someone, right? And it's like, it's like about being chosen, right? And I think that's what a lot of women, they're just kind of sitting around like waiting to be chosen, when it's like, as women, like, we should be doing the choosing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's so true. It's a case of, like you said earlier, you mentioned earlier about there's bachelors and spinsters, and it's like the women are the ones who are meant to, like, you failed if you haven't attracted the right person to you. But it's like, but hang on, the boys aren't getting all of this backlash.
They're getting celebrated, they're
Yeah, they're being celebrated. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, there is definitely this narrative that you're not complete if you don't have a partner, and I think that's utter bullshit.
I I think you summed up that up very well. I think, yeah, and it's because I don't, I think that's why what we're doing is so important, because there is still that negative narrative that is focused only. I mean, I think men do get it as well, depending on who their family and friends are, or where they're located in the world. But in general, I just feel like the pressure is more on the women. And I feel like anytime there's a disparity and like a double standard in how women or men are treated, whether we're talking about body image or being in a relationship, I feel like it's really important to have women hear different voices out there, like yours and your podcast. And because, yeah, it's like you said, it's bullshit. It's like, it literally is bullshit.
It is bullshit. Once you unravel it all, it's actually a great big load of bullshit.
I love that. I love it. Yeah, it's like when you actually sit down and think about it. And I think that's this last year with like taking myself out of the dating, like just the searching part. I think that's what I've come to realize. It's just bullshit. It's something that like society or some people decided, oh, it's a way to control the narrative, right, for people. Yeah. So
Which includes, especially for women, this sort of this constant narrative to have children.
yeah,
I mean, we were talking about this as well beforehand, weren't we? I mean, this narrative that you definitely haven't made it unless you've got, you're married with children. And again, I call bullshit on that, because I think that, we're all so completely different, and that is the lifestyle for so many people. That is the right lifestyle. But for somebody like me, I know at this age that I've literally sort of found myself, if you like, that would have been disastrous had I gone down that road, in my 20s. That would, now where I am now in my life, I know that would not have been right for me in the slightest. And I think, that message is pumped into us from every direction, and it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. And it can lead to, a great deal of unhappiness in the world when everybody is doing the same thing, when we're all completely and utterly individual human beings.
right. And and there is this like box checking, right? Like, oh, I have the marriage, I have the house, I have the kids. And then I do think there are a lot of people that after that's done, maybe they don't feel comfortable talking about it yet, but I think a lot of people are like, oh, like I never questioned if this was the right lifestyle for me. I just did it because that's what everyone does. It's like, I think Dr. Peter McGraw talks about like the relationship escalator. So we just get on this escalator and we don't question if that's really what's right for us. It's just like, oh, well, that's what everyone around me is doing, or that's what I grew up with. And it's really detrimental to society, if you think about it.
It's totally detrimental because, he talks about his, like the 4 different types of people that he sort of like narrowed it down to, that there are 4 different types of people. And, there's some people that, yeah, that's absolutely the right life path, and they meet somebody who that's their right life path, and that goes off, and that's perfect. But then you've got like somebody who wants that lifestyle dating someone like me, for example, and like there's no way that can work. So if I'm trying to squeeze myself into that box in society and say, oh yeah, that's definitely what I want, knowing full well inside, like, oh my gosh, that's actually, I don't think that is what I want. And then, but doing it anyway because you feel that pressure from either family, friends, society in general. And that is how you end up with problems within society, because it's a lot of people feeling very, very unhappy, but sort of further on down the road.
Kind of going back to your point, like neither lifestyle is better or worse than the other, but I think it's just giving people the power to question like what's right for them. Like if they would really sit and just think about what's right for me and the life I want to live, right? And I think right now there's just not enough people questioning. They're just kind of following, what's that phrase? Like, a friend jumped off a cliff. Would you do that too? Like, I feel like we just have a lot of people just like on this escalator, or a lot of people just following along what's in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's the message that I'm trying to get out so clearly on my podcast, is that, to take a step back from everything and actually look at life and just think, look at it from every angle, especially children. Is that really, really what you want? Because the commitment of that is that's just life-changing, full stop, isn't it? That will completely change your life. But, I think there needs to be so much more education around the fact that this needs to be talked about so much more, that there are so many different ways to live a life, and it doesn't have to all go down this one road. And there is nothing wrong with being different. That's the crux of this, is being different, because, we are tribal. And so, of course, it's natural to want to fit in to some degree, but I think being different is actually really awesome. And I love the fact that I've lived a different life and that I'm now able to talk about that and produce a podcast, which, as you know, Rachel, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of commitment, but it's something that's so important to me to do that. And there's no way I'd be able to do that if I had a family, because I've got that time in my life to to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think, that kind of like segues into like the questions I always ask at the end of my podcast. And it's like, my goal with this, and maybe yours is similar, is like if I just help like one woman realize that there's a different way to live, and it's okay, it's acceptable. And I think being single is still kind of a diversity issue that's being ignored, and it's a growing population. So it's like, it's important to start talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really think that you'll find, Rachel, that once people start reaching out to you and you start getting messages from people, like, that is worth so much. And it just, like you said, if you can just reach one woman just to change somebody's life, then that's just incredible with what you're doing. And I really hope that you get lots and lots of love, which I'm sure you will get lots and lots of positivity back from this, because it's changing people's lives. If you, like you said, if it was just one person that just turns around and has the confidence to think, actually, I'm fine on my own. Or, like we said, you don't have to be on your own. You'd have to decide. That's another thing. You don't have to make a decision and just stick to it forever. But it's to do with being comfortable with being on your own, and then potentially organically meeting that person, but not chasing after that.
Yeah. So I have two last questions. I want to be respectful of your time. So my podcast is called The Feisty Heroine. And one thing I am noticing with my conversations is that women kind of have a moment, right? Like this, and I'm calling it their heroine moment, like the turning point for when they realize they can kind of save themselves and live a different life, and it's okay. Can you kind of pinpoint? I think you talked about it earlier. If you can kind of pinpoint what that is.
Yeah, so that was that moment for me. So obviously coming across Lucy's podcast and just having that light bulb moment of, oh my God, actually that inner voice I've been listening to my whole life was actually right. and it was what was keeping me from being in the wrong situation with somebody. And yeah, that was literally my aha moment. I was out with my dogs and I stood there and thought, I don't have to, this doesn't have to be my life anymore. I don't have to spend my life feeling like this and feeling that I need to be in a relationship with a man. I can live my life and enjoy myself and let all of this crap go. And that's exactly what I did that day. And I've never looked back, and I've never felt happier in my life. It's awesome. It's so awesome when you realize that you are happy on your own, or that you definitely can be, and you can build on it. You can build on your life, spend time with your friends. It's just awesome.
I literally just got goosebumps whenever you were talking about that, because I can totally relate to like everything that you just said. And I think it's just, such a beautiful moment. It's like, oh, wow, like I'm okay. I'm doing okay.
Yeah, exactly.
My final question is, for those women out there listening who are either struggling with being single, right? They haven't turned the page like we have, or maybe they're stuck in a bad relationship for fear of being single or what's on the other side. What are some words of advice that you would like to leave them with?
I think firstly, for people who are struggling with being single, I think what's really important is, I think, to sit back and actually, even if you've got a pad and pen and said, why am I struggling with this? And be really, really honest with yourself and ask yourself why you actually want a relationship. Because I think because of the narrative, we just all do without questioning what it is that we actually want from that. Now, some people genuinely do, and that's absolutely, but I think it's got to come from a place of happiness, whatever. If you're looking for one, if you're not looking for one, you've got to be able to be happy in yourself. However cliche that is, it's absolutely true. With regards to sort of accepting being single. I think the thing is to, do a lot of personal growth work, is to sort of spend time working out exactly who you are. And, that inner voice that I've been talking about, we've all got that inner voice. And if something doesn't feel right, that voice doesn't lie to you at all. That is your intuition. That is your intuition telling you that something's not right. And that goes for friendships, jobs, relationships. That goes for absolutely everything. And I think it's just so important to identify what it is that you want for a relationship, not just sort of just looking for one, and also not accepting anything less than what you deserve in life from, I'm in various groups online with lots of women. I've seen sort of examples of what's going on in dating apps these days. I mean, I haven't been on one for probably a couple of years probably. And the quality of what is going on in those apps now is just, from what I've seen, it's diabolical. So, it's taking a big step back and thinking like, is this really what I want in my life? Somebody who's going to write this sort of thing to me. And with regards to relationships, like if you're in a relationship, obviously there's various situations that it could be very, very difficult to leave that situation for various reasons. Of course it could. But what I would say is that as soon as you make a start to come away from that situation, and just to be, to be brave and to make that decision, to think, right, this is not right for me, I need to move on. And I think if you come out of a situation like that, I would just take a huge step back, not be tempted to sort of jump in and get with somebody else immediately. Just take a huge step back and work out exactly what you want from life and sort of go from there. Because like I said, we're so conditioned to think that this is the only way to live, and it absolutely isn't.
Thank you for that. I think I have, as you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, I have a couple of friends that are going through separation and divorces, and they're already on the dating apps. And it's so interesting to me, because I think what you said about like listening to our inner voice is so important. And I think so many times we try to distract ourselves by doing something else because we know what the answer might be, but we don't want it to be that.
The other thing that we're told is that being single equals being lonely. And I think it's funny, a friend of mine has recently, she's come out of a marriage, she's divorced now, she's been divorced over a year, and she did the same. She went sort of straight into dating apps and things like that. And we sort of had a chat, and she said, oh, I feel lonely. And I said, but do you actually feel lonely, or do you sort of, are you thinking that you feel lonely? And we sort of chatted about it. And she'd actually recently messaged me and said, oh, do you know what? I'm really enjoying being on my own. And I think, because I think it's so easy I used to think I was lonely. I used to think I wanted to be in a relationship. And although obviously this is just my experience, but, looking back on that, I wasn't lonely. I was caught up in this spell that relationship equals happy, relationship equals accepted, relationship equals everything that everything that we're taught. And I think if you start to really, really question, I question everything now, to be honest, because I feel like I live my life under a complete and utter spell. So I'm like,
yeah, me too. I like that. Yeah, it is. If you think about it, it's like a spell. Yeah, it's totally true.
it is. And I think when you wake up to that and sort of, take a step back and look at your life, and also just be like, to be so grateful for what you do have, instead of, I definitely spent my life thinking about what I didn't have. And I never, ever looked at what I did have. I never did that, because I was just so desperate to get to this point of being in a relationship.
Well, and I think that's a good point about the loneliness thing, because I think that is a big assumption. But I write about this a little bit on my Instagram page. I felt more alone in my relationships than I ever did by myself. But I think we're taught this spell that we're like, oh, like being single equals lonely. But when I really sat down and thought about it, over the course of the last few years, I'm like, I was more alone in my relationships than I ever was on my own. So,
yeah, that says a lot, doesn't it? That says such a lot. And I've heard that so many times, and I've experienced that as well. That feeling of sort of just thinking this isn't right for me. And that's what causes you to feel lonely. It's a horrible feeling. It's a horrible feeling. It's not physically being alone. It's loneliness in your head, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I want to go ahead and wrap this up because I appreciate your time so much. And thank you so much for sharing your story, parts of your story. And I'll put the link to your podcast, One Single Woman, below so people can find you. And
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me on. And I would love you to come onto my podcast because I want to hear all of this from your side, because I knew that we had a sort of a bit of a time limit today. So I would love to have your story on my podcast.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Pip. Have a wonderful day and we'll chat soon.
And you. Bye.
Bye.